Hi, everyone. Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, wishing you a Happy New Year. We had a great 2022 with our long awaited trip to Italy to visit ancestral towns and meet long lost cousins in June, and having my book, Farmers and Nobles, published in October. It's always difficult to select the best clips, but here's a sample of some of our favorites. We had record views, downloads, and visits to our site for the second year in a row, and we appreciate the support. We already have great interviews lined up through March. If you would like to tell your story, send us an email to ompinfo51@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Italian Roots and Genealogy, and join our Facebook group. And don't forget to purchase a copy of Farmers and Nobles from our website, Amazon, Janaway, or Barnes and Noble. Born in Italy and adopted by American parents, is that right?
That's right. I think my byline is made in Italy, adopted in the USA. That kind of much sums it up.
So, when did you find out that you were adopted from Italy?
Yeah, let's put it this way. I found out when my parents told me, which is as early as I can remember, which is the best way for parents to approach this,
Right.
because we know now, probably didn't know in the 50s and the 60s, but the best thing for a child is to know where they come from, what their identity is, so there's no shock or late discoveries, as we call them in the adoption world, further on in life. And my parents being very open about it, they actually adopted four kids from Italy: myself, Paul and David, my twin brothers, and Sarah, my sister. So let's say I didn't grow up alone. I was very fortunate to have a beautiful family, to be raised in Poughkeepsie, New York, in upstate New York, and to have grown up in a country of freedom and a country where it gave me everything. My parents were artists. Of course, my dad's a painter, and he decided, he was a GI during the Second World War. He fought in the European theater. After the war was over, while he was waiting to get repatriated, he decided to come to Italy to check out the countryside and his origins, because as you can tell from Campitelli, my last name is from Abruzzo, in the province of Teramo, there in the town of Ancarano. That's where my Campitelli relatives are from. And he decided to come to Italy and check it out while he was waiting to go back to the States. And he fell in love with Italy as being an artist, and with the art capital of the world being Florence. He said, when I grow up,
Sure.
have a family, I'm going to bring my family back to Italy. And that's what we did. In 1969, with my brothers and sisters, my parents, we moved to Florence. And I spent from 69 to 79 in Italy. And that's why I speak Italian. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. Here, meaning in Italy, not on the beach, as you can see from my background. I actually moved back to Italy in 1999, and I met my wife here in Italy, and now I'm married, and I have two teenage daughters.
Wow, that's awesome. That's an incredible story. So, not being familiar with how that all worked back in the I guess the 50s and 60s and 70s when Americans were adopting Italian children.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how did they know about that? I mean, because he was there and was in the country so much, did he learn of the possibility of doing that?
That's a good question. I guess back in those days, word of mouth did everything. There was no such thing as internet, no such thing as
Yeah.
as video blogging and recording and Zoom meetings and so forth. So I think they just asked the relatives and friends, the pastor, the parish, the local parish, to say, what can we do? Since my mom had a hysterectomy, she couldn't have children. They said, we want to have a family, and we can't have kids. What's the easiest way to do it? And they said, well, there's no easy way to adopt children, as you well know.
Mhm.
But there is a surplus of orphans, quote unquote, in Italy. And if you're willing to go that route, there's hundreds and hundreds of children waiting for families over there. And the Italian authorities are open to releasing these children and letting them emigrate to the United States so that they can be adopted by good families and be raised. And my parents said, yeah, I mean, my dad was an Italian background, as I mentioned earlier. So he said, why not? Let's try it.
Tell me, how did you come up with the idea for the book? How'd that all come together?
Yeah, there are really two main reasons that the book came together. The first was about 3 years ago when I noticed that between all the work that I had been doing and the work of a lot of other folks on Ancestry.com, we had traced a significant percentage of the immigrants from our village of Bicari to America. We're very lucky that the province of Foggia has digitized all the birth records for the province, which you can see an example here from Ancestry.com of the digital records. So once you could trace an ancestral branch back to 1860, it was pretty much a straight shot into 1700. So it really encouraged a lot of people to keep going. And as of now, there's probably Ancestry.com profiles of over 1,200 immigrants from the village to Philadelphia.
That was a pretty amazing map that you put together for sure.
The other thing that I noticed was really something on my wife's side that spurred the data analysis on, which is kind of a part of this project. My wife was born a Wallace, the Scottish Wallaces, and the records in Scotland are pretty amazing and go back over 1,000 years. And one of the things I noticed was I kept seeing the same death date over and over and over again, the 9th of September, 1513. So I exported the tree and saw that she probably had over 30 direct ancestors with the exact same death date. So I just Googled it and found out that something happened, a big battle between England and Scotland called the Battle of Flodden Field, where all of these people died in this major battle. At the time, I was working with a woman from Scotland, and I asked her about it, and she knew all about it. It was a national day of sorrow for the loss of thousands of young men in about half an hour. And knowing how important Scottish immigration was to the founding of America, I suspect there's millions of people in this country whose ancestors come from the folks that died, in Flodden Field. So with that term, with all of that data, I coined the term big data genealogy, where you can analyze data to just bring more stories to light as opposed to just having names and birth dates. There really is a lot out there in looking at the data trends.
That's something that I kind of found. I didn't have a lot of information like that, but when I came across an old will that was translated, it was really amazing because you start to get the character of the people.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things, as you may know, I have a background in finance and understanding how data is used. We started doing some rudimentary statistical analysis, i.e. this, big data genealogy. So we downloaded these Ancestry.com trees into a GEDCOM PAF file and then uploaded it into Legacy 9.0, which you see here. This program allows you to do data key searches on key terms, and then you can export the results to Microsoft Excel, which you can then use to really analyze the data. So some of the things that we did was we calculated how many people came over each year, breakdown of men versus women, average age on arrival, average number of trips, and where they settled once they got to America. We're also very fortunate that we have the church records of Bicari back to 1550. So we could then have people build trees even further back than what you could find online on Ancestry.com. A lot of folks have their trees from back in the 1800s. In the church records, where it lists all of the different children for each of the fathers, and then you just go to the page numbers and get all the records.
For example, when I was very young, when I was a child, my father, that was a teacher, used to take his students to Pietrabondante site, and Nicola, and he was with him all the time. So when he was very young, my father loved how our land, and he transmitted to me this love by chance, but really I don't think it's just by chance. My mother was born in Abruzzo, that is the region of the Marsi, and actually my father was born in the Samnite region, and my mother was born in the Marsi region. So it's not just by chance, because these were Marsi and Samnites, the most important peoples that fought against Rome and then generated Italy.
Per ultimo, i miei nonni e i miei antenati da 500 anni abitano
And last but not the least, my grandparents and my ancestors have been living in the same area where I live for 500 years. And actually, they used to live, they were peasants, and they used to live on the stones that look up at Pietrabondante, that is and was the capital, the religious capital of the Samnites.
You know, a lot of Americans, Italian Americans, do not understand. And no, I didn't know. And I was very happy to visit there, because I didn't realize when we put the tour together that we were actually going to visit such a wonderful place. But what would you say to Italian Americans who don't understand the history of the real Italy?
I think that not even Italians know well the history of Italia that was born in those places. In Italy, and in the historical interpretation, also in Italy, when we study, our students study history of Italia, it seems as if Italia was born with Romulus and Remo, with Rome. Which is not, in fact, what really happened, because there was another Italia that was born before, and that was also against Rome. So there is another history that needs to be known. And what is important is that in order to know Italy, we need to know that history, because today's Italy is influenced, strongly influenced by that history and by the Roman Empire. And we need to know exactly what happened, as for example, there were 12 peoples, different peoples with 12 different languages that today influences the dialects in our regions.
Prima aggiungi la musica, ancora poco a poco, ma vinna una canzone di fuoco. Amangia grava, miss, pizzulia, pizzulia. Amangia grava, pizzulia, pizzulia. Allora, cosito corosito. Allora, questo è dedicato al sindaco. Al Major si chiama. Come si chiama? The Major. Ok, The Major. Quando vedi Don Sindaco che tutto pede ossa e dopo 2 o 3 mesi si faccia panza rossa. Non domandato come e manco lo perché. Vestitevi de fisse e decideci così. Signor Sindaco, a mangiare grappa. Pizzulia, pizzulia. Bravo, perfetto. A mangiare grappa. Pizzulia, pizzulia. Brava.
You could retire in Italy using what I call a retirement visa. I'm sure there's another name for that, the correct name for that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Absolutely, yeah. Italian citizenship by descent, especially, I mean, it's really famous and trending, especially in the United States. But there are other options if you want to come in Italy, and especially if you want to retire in Italy. That is also very common too for American citizens. So actually, there are a lot of people that email to us asking, okay, but I would like to retire here. Also, if I don't have an Italian heritage, so how can we do that? So how can we retire in Italy? Actually, right now there are two main options to coming here for retirement. For example, the first option is the so-called elective residency visa. This type of visa is a visa that was designed by the government especially for retired people. So, I mean, in this case, you have a really specific design visa that you can apply for. For this type of application, you have, of course, to demonstrate that you are or retired or actually you can live in Italy without working. Because in the beginning, this is very important, in the beginning, the Italian government designed this type of visa only for retired people. So actually you have to show that you are retired, so you have your retirement incomes from Social Security Administration or from other retirement other forms of retirement incomes actually. But later they extend the eligible people to apply for this type of visa, and so generally speaking, you have to demonstrate that you can live in Italy without working. And I mean, in 99% of cases, we are talking about retired people.
So is there a limit? I mean, I'm assuming that there's some sort of monetary limit that you have to meet in order to be able to do that, whether it's one person or two people.
Yes, correct. Actually, you have to demonstrate, this is the main requirement. You have to demonstrate that you have a minimum income of 32,000 euros per year.
When we got down here, you know, and we had called a cousin in Pennsylvania, and oh yeah, no, connect with so and this and that, and sure enough, we were greeted by, you know, distant cousins and other family, and we just had a wonderful time. And then we realized we should have put that on the list first because we only had like 3 days, but we really fell in love with the place, and then of course realized this is where my mother's grandmother was from, and her grandfather, and so it really struck a chord, you know. And so the fiance and myself, Nancy, we got invited back the next year from some of the family that we had met. They said, "Oh, my son's getting married. No, you should come to the wedding," you know. So we did, and we got an Airbnb, you know, we got a B&B. But then we started looking, oh, these properties, you know, they're kind of nice. And
yeah.
And again, Nancy just was like, I love this place. We should do this. So we started buying a property, you know, and we had some help because one of the distant relatives is a lawyer and helped us with the purchasing of the property. You know,
That's great. Yeah, I mean that's just fabulous. You know, we came back with the same thing. We were back. I don't think we were back a day, and we were walking down the street, and we live in a very quiet place in New Jersey, Bradley Beach, and especially in the winter, there's nobody here. The summer people go home and everything. But we were walking down the street, and my wife says, "I can't believe we're back here. We're not there anymore."
Oh yeah.
And she says, "I wish we were there." I said, "Be careful of what you ask for." I said, "We may." I said, "I'm ready to go. I'll pack up everything and go."
Well, I know it seems that way because once you do it a few times, the flight really isn't that bad, and then you realize it's not that hard to get there. I mean, you pay more to go to California from the East Coast. So, and the flights nowadays are you know, kind of, they're, you know, financially feasible, and they're quick, and they're pretty comfortable. So you know, before you know, you can get here pretty easy.
I know a lot of people are going to be interested in this. So how did you find the place? Did you get a real estate? Did you just go traveling around town? Or?
Well, again, fortunate because we had some family that knew somebody who was planning. They knew that they had moved away north, and they had a place. Now I have two places, but so the first place we bought, they knew that they kind of wanted to get rid of it. It's kind of a beach house down by the sea. So we investigated that, and they were, sure enough, they were like, yeah, no, we've been trying to sell it. So what was exciting, and we realized, is that There are a lot of places to sell here, but they're also very sleepy little towns that, the tourists don't really even come down to Calabria. I mean, let's face it, it's all mostly agriculture. And so there's not a lot of people coming here. It's rare for anybody to say they went there to see the sights. Although I love the sights.
The sights are unbelievable there.
Yeah, because it's all ancient.
Yeah.
And it's open, and it's more like archaeological parks. And, everything is more open air type of stuff. The national park, and it's a more natural environment. You could walking on trails and the old, the rocks and the waterfalls, and of course the sea. The beaches are beautiful over here.
Yeah.
Nice sandy. So, anyways, we went for it. And it's a small place. It's really, you're at the beach all day. You go there, you got your bedroom, you got your bathroom, and you got a little sitting room with a kind of a galley kitchen. So we got that. Yeah. First.
Right. And so now the second place, you're renovating the second place, correct?
Yeah, that's where I am now. You can probably tell it's a little echoey because we don't have all the furniture in it. I don't know. You can hear me okay though, right? I mean,
no, you sound good. You sound like, we
Okay.
have a little reverb on your voice. So it sounds really good.
Oh, it's better. Okay. Yes. Not all the furniture's in. We're waiting for the kitchen to come in. But it's a great place. It overlooks the Castellino Plaza here, which, is kind of a public square. But because it's such a sleepy little town, not much happens down there, but it's nice. It's open. There's like 7 churches in the area. And we started about a year ago to really work on it. There happens to be a small apartment attached to it that we now we have the one down by the sea listed as an Airbnb. The other one is not, well, we're just finishing it. Actually, my son is in town. He's down by the sea right now. And so, he was in there. And then we have like a main house that has bigger rooms as a sojourner, like the living room with an attached bathroom and a large kitchen. And we have a terrace, and we can go up to the rooftop. And we have a balcony out front, and we have a couple large bedrooms. So it's a lot, but it's it's built to last 1,000 years. So
Yeah.
it's structurally sound. There's no problems there. It was just upgrading it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So to that point, doing the work and upgrading is the 2 questions really is, one, compared to the States, is it expensive? And 2, are you able to find the workers to do it?
Yeah. Yes, I found the workers here. I'm lucky too, though. I was brought up in the construction industry. My grandfather and my father and my brother and my brother-in-law, we had a family business in the electrical field, electrical contracting. And then I developed that more, and I got into building, and I got licensed as a builder and throughout my career and as a building inspector. So I know construction and I know project management. But I was lucky enough, it was a cute little story, that when I did start the job, I was kind of wondering, how am I going to get this done? I was out on the balcony, and sure enough, there was a guy down there in the plaza. And he said, "Are you the American that bought that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He spoke a little English. Come to find out, he lived in America for a few years, Antonio. And I said, and he was right away, he was kind of like, "Well, if you need any help." And I'm like, "Come on up." And he's a godsend, really. He had all the tools. He, and he helped him with the way things are done here. Because I was trying to kind of insert my experience, but it hadn't been in Europe, and it hadn't been working on homes that were built to last 500 years. So there was a little bit of a learning curve, but the principles are the same. Although the electricity, of course, is 220 volts instead of our usual, and I was interested. It was kind of surprised to find out all my equipment, whether it was my plumbing, kitchen faucets, and cabinets, and even my tools I was buying, screwdrivers, so much. It's all made in Italy. I mean, they make so much
Really?
stuff here. All my
Wow.
electrical equipment, yeah. All my heating and air conditioning. I mean, some of it may be assembled, like a lot of places in China or something, but a lot of Italian goods. And and slowly, Antonio, of course, helped me connect with the hardware store people and other tradesmen around. We needed, some special doors. We wanted to customize a door. We have a kind of a sliding glass door that we decided to put in, and we etched the glass, so we had some nice features. But the expense, I would say no. I would say it's less. It's definitely less.
Jewish man who helped.
Oh, yes.
That
Yeah.
stuff doesn't happen
If
these
I-
days.
No, it was. Do you want me to tell that story quickly? if I can, Bob?
yeah.
Okay. These were the Uberalls. Okay, Solomon and Esther. This is their picture, Bob. Can you see it? Am I doing that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I can see it.
Solomon and Esther Uberall. When St. Lucy's was being built, okay, the Italians still wanted a place to go to church, so they rented or bought a nearby storefront so that they could have mass on Sunday there. Okay, a priest was assigned to the parish, but he had a place to live, but there was no church, so they had mass in this storefront. They had to buy it, okay, and they put down a small amount of money because they were spending their money on the church, and they got a huge mortgage for them at the time, huge, to be paid in 1913. Now this is 1904. They presumed by 1913 the place would be built. We could sell the building and then satisfy the mortgage. By 1913, they hadn't got the marble from Italy yet for the main altar, so the church couldn't be built. The mortgage was due, and a Father Caruana from Malta was assigned as the pastor. He had to pay the mortgage, or they would lose the storefront. Just to make it quick, he went for a walk in the neighborhood trying to raise money. He couldn't. He went into the Uberall store. Now the Uberalls, Esther and Solomon, were a newly married couple, and they had a notion store on Myrtle Avenue, Bob, Myrtle and between Kent and Franklin. And again, this is 1913, and he went in, and Solomon said to Father George, "Father, why are you so sad?" And he explained to him he needed the money. He needed $500, which to them was a lot of money at the time, Bob. He said, or we're going to lose the place where we say mass on Sunday. Solomon says, "I'll take care of it, Father." Father George just says, okay, assuming that that Solomon was just being nice. Esther said to him, "Where are we going to get the money?" But they did. Solomon went from family member to family member, and he hocked their wedding gifts. He got the $500. He lent it to Father George. He paid off the mortgage, and every Monday morning after Sunday collection, Father George would go and pay off part of that $500 debt to Solomon and Esther. Now, St. Lucy's was built in 1914. Father George was transferred to St. Leo up in Corona. I think you know Corona, Bob.
Yeah, yes,
okay?
that's where we're from. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that on one of your podcasts. And Solomon and Esther stayed at the store. Okay. Now, Solomon unfortunately died in around 1920, right at the end of World War I. He had a heart attack as a young man and died. Esther continued with the store, the Notion store. Her family helped her. Her children got older. But she and Father Caruana, of course, never saw each other again. in 1939 and 1940, in that era, Esther was getting many letters from Solomon's family in Austria. Solomon was from Austria, she was from Russia, and pleading with her to try to get them into America, because there was this madman talking about gas chambers and things, so they had to get out of Austria. She didn't know what to do. She tried, but all the quotas were filled. She goes to Washington, D.C. She was very determined to get her family here, his family here. And she got no place. As she was about to leave, somebody told her, if you could get your family into Cuba, okay, Cuba will take refugees, but you need someone there who can provide for them, house them, clothe them, feed them, because they cannot be, wards of the state. Cuba will not allow that. So she was elated for a while. She gets on the train to come back to Brooklyn and realizes she doesn't know anybody in Cuba. She went directly to St. Lucy's Church then, and she spoke to Father DeLiberty. He was the new pastor. Now this is 1940-ish. He said, I'll write a letter to the papal nuncio down in Cuba. I'll cable him and I'll let you know. A few days later, he says to her, get on the plane and go down. They're ready to meet with you. She gets on a plane, goes down to Cuba. As she gets off the plane, Bob, she sees an altar boy dressed in his altar attire approaching her with a bouquet of flowers. And she's a little puzzled. So quizzically, she looks up and she sees an ecclesiastically robed, man dressed in red with his arms stretched out. And he says, Esther Uberall, don't you remember me? And it was Father Caruana. She broke down into tears. Well, this is Father Caruana. He is now an archbishop. Okay, he's an archbishop, and he is the papal nuncio in Cuba, with a direct link, obviously, to Rome. But even better than that, as the papal nuncio, he was working for the Secretary of State, who happened to be Eugenio Pacelli, who in 1939 became Pope Pius XII. So he had a direct link right to the Pope. And they were able to get 24 of Solomon's relatives out of Austria into Cuba. And Father Caruana provided for them, housed them. He gave them kosher food, and Esther was elated.
The first thing, when you talked about Antoinette's sister, I had no idea that Antoinette's sister was Maria Carolina, the Queen of Naples.
Yeah.
So what got you started with this book and picking her as a subject?
It started because when I was working on The Woman in Red, my editor asked for more information about the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And I was like, sure, I'm going to go ahead and do some research. And I did what any good writer does and become an expert overnight. And within 24 hours, I was getting all these stories about Ferdinand, which when you read the book, all of those antics that he did, from pulling wigs off of people. I'm sorry, my dog, she wanted to come to my lab. She wants to be a part of the show. All of the antics, from the pulling the wigs off of people's heads, the hot buttered spaghetti on top of their wigs, playing chess with the old men, that was all a part of everything he did, all of it. And I thought, oh my God, who's the poor woman who was stuck with him? Somebody had to have been married to him. Somebody had to put up with these antics. And I really feel bad for her. And so I did some more research, and I came across Maria Carolina Charlotte and the story of what she had to go through just to take power in Naples, to be able to she had to control him, because really, let's face it, he wasn't really able to rule a kingdom, and become one of 3 women who actually stood up to Napoleon. And that's what brought me to her, and finding this family that she was a part of. And it's sad because when it comes to her and Marie Antoinette, they were so close, and she's forgotten about. They were raised as twins when they were young. They are 3 years apart. but the two women looked so much alike that after Marie Antoinette's death, when people came from France over to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, there was a woman who actually fainted upon seeing Maria Carolina Charlotte because they looked so much alike. And the sisters were very, very close. And it is true that Maria Carolina was Marie Antoinette's most favorite sister. And when I say most favorite sister, there were 16 children that Maria Theresa had. So there were quite a few sisters, but Maria Carolina was a favorite.
And she had a lot of children too.
She did. She could not be outdone by her mother, and she had 17.
I guess if you have the servants and the nannies and all that, it's not so
exactly,
bad.
exactly. I don't even have one yet. I'm like, my God.
So anybody who's watching, I'm sitting in the Caserta Palace right now behind me. I forget which room it is, but
it looks kind of like the throne room.
It could be. Yeah, it probably is. Yeah,
I think that's the throne room.
So now, as I'm reading this book,
Mm-hmm.
I started, then I said, I have to research the sisters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, they are my 8th cousins, 8 times removed.
Really?
Yeah. So I didn't go back to Ferdinand. I know I'm definitely related to Ferdinand too, and probably the Empress also. Because Ferdinand, I know he comes from the Spanish royalty, and you know, my great-grandmother's family comes from Spanish royalty. So I said I have to figure, I have to see if I'm related to them somehow. And as it turns out, we're 8th cousins, 8 times removed. And you know, as you're describing the palace and the nobles in Italy, I'm thinking to myself, well, some of my great-grandparents were probably there at these functions.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were, you know, there were princes and there were, you know, dukes and counts and all of that. But what I found funny was, I guess Ferdinand, I guess he handed out princes and princesses at will.
And the thing that I found with researching him is that this idea of royalty just was lost on him. He was very much a man of the common people.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really wanted to portray, was that he loved Italy. He loved Naples. He wouldn't speak anything but dialect.
The stress that immigrants went through, and my mother was a victim of that. She came, well, could I tell the story?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So my grandmother's family came together, which was unusual. They all came, 3 sisters and the mother and father, and they came in 1901. So they were late. You know, my father's side got a head start. And the biggest thing that they had to do with these 3 sisters was get them married, you know, because my grandmother came here when she was born in 1881. So she was 20. She was almost like past prime age of getting married. So the marriages were like, somebody asked you, you go with them. It wasn't nobody made a decision. It was, you know, you're gone. You're out of the house, make your life. Not that they didn't love each other. They were a very loving family, my grandparents, but that was what you had to do to survive. My grandfather, grandfather, I think it's was a boot black. You know a boot? I didn't know what a boot black was. The woman, he shined shoes.
Right, yeah.
And so I don't know where he you know, could have been on a corner. I don't know. But when they were in Italy, my grandmother could read and write. So they were not poor people, but they were not, you know, nobility. But they all decided to come together. Again, I don't know why. Because I know my father's reasons, but the American dream, I guess. But
Yeah.
So the first two sisters got married. All of them married older men, much older. And then my grandmother got married to a much younger man. She had two children very quickly. Infant mortality was tremendously high. So the first child died, second child, my aunt Sunda, came along. And then my grandfather got diagnosed with TB. And they said, okay, you have to go back to Italy. The air's better. We're in the North End. I mean, the North End at that time had the population density of Calcutta.
Okay, so let's look at the first slide. So whatever happened to Sunday dinner? You see two books there. My first and second book, Growing Up Italian, is the first one. The second is Whatever Happened to Sunday Dinner. In those books are a series of short stories, easy reads, if you will, about my experiences growing up in an Italian household with an Italian culture, with family surrounding. So I collected these stories. Actually, I have an ebook which has everything in it, and that's available. But I collected the stories from my home, the schools, my relatives, the neighborhood, and from pictures. So I found all these pictures of family in drawers, in old albums, and I was able to scan them into the computer. And from the pictures, I can tell a story. From your pictures, you'll be able to tell a story. So what just popped up there is a May 1946 image of my grandfather. This is how we remember him. This must have been a Sunday. He's dressed in his vest and tie. And he was always well dressed. In fact, even when he worked in the garden, he was well dressed. And from that picture, I want you to think about your stories. Concentrate on you in this presentation. Concentrate on what's in this for you. How can you leave your story? How can you leave your legacy? And then how I, with this presentation, can help and give you the lessons and help you with lessons that I learned along the way. So why does this matter? Who cares? Well, you care. I care. We care. I care about these stories because I've lived them. You've lived them. And you're here to tell them. And it brings meaning, I believe, to your life. And it becomes your story when you shape it. That's why the stories matter. There's a picture of, that's me right there in the junior high school dance. And I can tell a story from that. And I have in some of the books because these stories matter. So my first book of Growing Up Italian, people say, how do you remember all these stories? Well, I was fortunate to grow up in a three-story home with my grandparents on the second floor. We lived on the third floor, my brother and I and parents, and I had an aunt and uncle and their three children on the first floor. So it was a compound. It was a family compound. I was the only child in that house for 6 years. So I have a lot of great memories. And I have a lot of relatives I can rely on for research. I had two elderly cousins who I could pick up the phone and say, was this the way it happened? And I also did my research from newspaper articles, coincident with the time, magazines. The library is a great resource when you think you're stuck in pictures, as I said, are critical. Remember, when you're writing a memoir, you're writing truth. When you write an autobiography, you're writing fact. So there's a big difference. So people say to me, how do you remember those conversations from when you were 10 years old? Well, that's what I remember. That's not the actual conversation, but that is the truth of what went on. So from the pictures like this, there's my grandfather. When he worked in the garden, that's how he looked. So I often wonder if he came back today and saw me in front of my fig tree here, dressed in shorts and a golf shirt and sneakers, something he would never quite understand. And I want you to look at this picture and tell me if you can tell this story. And I would say that you could. What are these kids doing? Look at the looks on their faces. Look at the dress. It's period dress. What year do you think this happened? They're, of course, playing chestnuts, and who's concentrating on hitting that chestnut, et cetera, et cetera. And these pictures. So how important is this picture? Look here at this picture on your left. That's my father right there. That's his father. This is not his mother. That is my father's 16-year-old sister. At the birth of their last child, the mother passed away. So he lost his wife, and my aunt raised all these kids and lived long enough to see them pass away. She lived to 100 years old. But what else can you tell about this picture? What day is it? Well, it's a Sunday. Were they happy? Was it hot? You can bet your life they weren't happy, and they didn't want to be there for that picture. So there's a story of a family right in that picture. Oh, look at my mother's family here. They didn't have any money. They were poor immigrants. But on this summer Sunday, they were probably at the shore. This is my grandfather, who you saw in the previous picture. Look at these sailing caps. So they probably took a trolley to the beach shore for the Sunday afternoon. That's my grandfather, my grandmother, and my great-grandparents, her parents, my grandmother's parents were here. So another story that I can write from that picture. And these pictures, you all have these pictures. Look at my father. He's a working man. He's proud of his dress. You think he's a Gatsby kind of guy, but he's just a working man. Or my mother and her friends, look how very well dressed they were. And my father and his friends, here's my dad here, having fun. All these pictures tell a story. From these pictures, I remember things. Of course, I don't remember this, but this is my grandfather when he was young and left, when he was in Italy. But this story of these Italians in the old country, if you will, tells a story. Look at this kid, three-piece suit and a fob. Look at his father's hand on his shoulder. What is this telling you? What do you and look at the serious faces. In all those pictures, the Italians never smiled. So I always, when the audience is live, I always ask them, why didn't the Italians smile? And the answers I get are, well, they had bad teeth. No, that wasn't the case. Well, they were there for a long time because it took a long time to take a picture and they weren't happy. No. Well, they were poor and they weren't happy. No. They didn't smile because they didn't smile. That was their culture. Being serious for a photo was how they thought you should behave. So again, a photo that tells a story. This is a great photo of Mulberry Street in New York, in the Italian section of New York. This picture is taken by a great sociologist and photographer named Jacob Riis, R-I-I-S, and tell a story from this. So what do you see? What day is this? Well, it's shopping day. Look how well dressed these poor immigrants are. What else do you see? People in tenements. No electricity, but they come out on this day, probably a Saturday, to buy their wares. Now, I want you to look at this kid here. I'm going to focus on him just for a minute. And then from him, you can see these people. Again, nobody smiling. Not an easy time for them in the early early 1900s, but yet they're all out conversing, shopping, and, if you will, having fun in the way that they could under difficult circumstances. Look at these kids here in New York. Look how well dressed they are. These are all immigrant children looking and listening to the organ grinder. Again, another story. For those of you from Rhode Island, this is Providence, Rhode Island in 1903. Well, we were doing a little better. We had electricity. Again, people on a shopping day, look how well dressed they are. And we had trolley tracks and a trolley that went down the main street. Again, tells a story. Those of you in Providence may see a very iconic image in this story. I'll point it out to you right there. That's the Shepherd clock. The Shepherd department store had a clock in front of it. And that was another iconic place. And here it is in the 50s, the Shepherd clock. And here it is even a little later than that.
This is usually what happens to Lou and I. We're invited to shows and then they leave. And
This is fantastic. I wish you could see comments though. I can't listen to comments here.
There he is.
There I am. So, good thing it's a good thing I'm on with comedians.
We took over for a little bit. You might not want to see the first minute of your show when you play this back.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's good that we're on with comedians. So anyway, I'm going to do the introduction again. I'm here with two very, very funny guys, if you haven't figured it out. Carlo Russo and Lou Greco, and they're the Uncle Lou Variety Show. So welcome, guys. Great to have you here. Well, you can come and play my backyard. I can't pay you any money, but I'll make you lunch.
We'll do it. We'll do it. We'll do it.
And we do custom videos for everybody. If you want to get, if you want to quit, if you want to say you have a birthday or whatever.
If you want a divorce.
We don't give a shit. If you want to get a divorce, we'll tell him off. It doesn't matter. And then on Facebook.
So you'll actually quit for somebody. They don't have to do it. You just send a video of you.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So you have to give me an example of quitting.
We haven't done the fire yet. No one's hired us for that yet. There's more.
You think I'm gonna work to my mom? You think I'm gonna work? I'm gonna quit. Don't take a shit to you. Tu e chiro cavato amarie.
And then we might end it with I guess that's our 2 week notice, and then it would cut. There's something like that.
Send the check. Send the check.
Yeah. So.
What prompted you to look into these early Italian immigrants? And by early, a lot of people think it all started in Ellis Island, but it didn't. It started right after the reunification. So why'd you do this?
Well, Joe has a personal connection to the beginning of this research.
Yeah, Bob, about 12 years ago, I wanted to find out about my great-grandfather's saloon. He had a saloon in Ohio at the turn of the previous century, and we knew nothing about it. And so all of this research comes from my quest for his saloon. And along the way, I found that one of my great-granduncles was one of the Italians who was swindled to come to this country, which is the topic of our book.
Right, and by swindled, as you go through the book, you learn about the Padroni, and before them, these nefarious people who would go to Italy and sell tickets or with the promises of the streets are paved with gold and all of those kinds of things. So why did that start? I mean, what prompted these people to do this kind of stuff?
Well, there were conditions that came from the unification of Italy. There were 3 wars of Italian independence, and when the southern part of Italy was annexed to create the Kingdom of Italy, that set off a lot of shockwaves because what it did was it ended feudalism. And in feudalism, there was some stability for peasants, especially the poorest peasants. And it was a kingdom. The kingdom of the Two Sicilies is what was defeated and annexed to the new Kingdom of Italy, to make the new Kingdom of Italy in 1861. And it was just a whole new economy, and in the new Kingdom of Italy, the leadership fell to a different social class, and it created a lot of really bad situations for the southern part of Italy, sometimes called the Mezzogiorno. And whenever there's chaos, there are always parasites. There are always people who can make a buck off of it.